You're listening to Seek Travel Ride, a podcast all about taking incredible bike adventures. And if you love the conversations that you hear on the podcast, you can experience them live. Join me in London on May 14 and 15 for Beyond the Bike. It's going to be a special night of adventure cycling stories, bike adventure film screenings, and a live Q&A with a panel of previous podcast guests. Tickets are on sale now. They will sell out fast. So make sure to grab yours at the link in the podcast show notes in your podcast player app. And now let's listen to today's episode.
It was a great realization it was actually when I found that waterfall in Guinea, as in found it for myself. And I did 12 or 15 kilometers that day. And I just thought, oh yeah, the shortest days have all been the best ones, because it means I've been on absolutely awful roads, pushing my bike, lifting it over trees, or going somewhere really exciting. And the most boring days by far were the perfect asphalt, straight, flat. And those were the days where I'd be complaining for sure, because I'm not that sort of cyclist.
Welcome to Seek Travel Ride, where we share the stories and experiences of people taking amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries, or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners. Hi everyone, Bella here, host of the show. Just to let you know, I'm currently on a little mini break. So this week I am giving you another throwback episode from the archives. And I'm actually giving you part 2 of Jude Kriwald's story. Last week I shared part 1, which was his amazing trip from England to India. And this week I'm continuing on with Jude's other monumental adventure, which was through West Africa. This journey was simply incredible, and what I especially love is hearing how 10 years on from that England to India experience, Jude rekindled his fire to actually go out there and bike adventure more. So without any further ado, here's part 2 of that episode with Jude, and I hope to be back with you for a new episode next week. 10 years passed, Jude, from the end of that trip to... or more than 10 years, to West Africa. I think it would be 11 years.
Yeah.
We mentioned at the start how the idea for England to India had formed in your mind, and it took a while before you could build up to actually be able to go and do it. What about West Africa? Where did the idea to travel there, how did that come about? And how much time passed from you having the idea to actually setting out to do the trip itself?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. It's interesting. In a way, a really short time, like a matter of months between conceiving it and leaving, but also really 10 years or 11 years. So, I came back from England to India and I thought, right, this is cool. This is it. I'm going to be a outdoory adventure person now. And I worked on a cycle tour, sort of a commercial cycle tour. There's a company, Tour d'Afrique, who run tours where you can pay $20,000 and they'll guide you if you want to cycle Cairo to Cape Town, and you don't need any panniers or anything. You just cycle and they do all the logistics. And I did that tour. I worked with them on the Silk Route from Shanghai to Istanbul and got paid absolute peanuts for it. And it didn't work out. We didn't really get on, me and the leaders, unfortunately, for whatever reason. I've reflected on it a lot since. But then after that, I was going to start my own cycling expedition business to take people on really adventurous 2 or 3 week tours like Trans-Himalaya or across the Sahara. And whilst I was doing that, I started working as a cycle courier for Deliveroo. And this is a really long way to answer your question, but it's directly, I promise you it is answering it. I went to interview to be a cycle delivery rider, and I was wearing my Iran cycling jersey, which someone had given me in Iran. And the guy who was interviewing me said, "Oh, I've seen your blog." And it turned out he'd followed my whole journey. And so we were sort of a bit pally. And for 2 months, I was doing cycle deliveries, delivering food for this brand new company, Deliveroo. And then he said, we need to hire someone in the office. Do you want to come and interview as an operations associate? So I did that. And anyway, whatever. The point is that Deliveroo grew very quickly. I got swept up with it. And we went from 1 city to 12 countries within 3 years. And I was fortunate enough to do well there. And I slowly drifted away from the world of adventure. I'd started as a cycle career to save money, to earn money whilst trying to set up my own business. And as happens to so many people, a sort of professional career sort of got in the way. And I don't regret that, because I learned some amazing things, and that time at Deliveroo was really formative for me. But I remember whilst working there, having the best time working there, but I'd lie awake at least once a week. I'd lie in bed at night thinking, why aren't I on my bike in the mountains? Like, it's just deep, unhappy calling of I'm not doing what I really want to be doing, even though everything I was doing made sense at the time. And I've had that feeling for years, basically, sort of since then. And that started in sort of 2015. And coming round to West Africa, I think the next obvious big trip for me was always, well, I've cycled from, Europe through a lot of Asia. I want to cycle Africa next. That's the big, big, exciting one. And I'll do the whole thing. I've got friends who've done the whole thing. And Agustin has cycled a large chunk of it. And you hear stories of lions and elephants. And I thought, amazing. But again, the trip always felt almost too big. And I was often in relationships, and it felt like, well, how could I ever take a year out to cycle Africa whilst in a relationship and whilst working and so on? And then actually it was only sort of because I was in a relationship that I was speaking to my girlfriend, and we sort of unintentionally had this conversation where I think I learnt that I could go away for up to 3 months and we'd both be okay with that. And then I thought, well, what can I do in 3 months? And I thought, well, West Africa's the most exciting region for me in Africa, and I could travel there in 3 months. And yeah, I sort of had that idea. I don't know, it was late summer, I think, and I was off at the start of December. So it really didn't take too long since I had the idea, but it was a long, long time coming. And there were 10 years pretty much of me thinking, I'm kind of aware that England to India, I hope this doesn't sound too not humble, but it was a pretty cool trip. And it was kind of like hard to live up to that in a way, which is why I kept thinking it has to be a big trip. It has to be all of Africa, or I have to cycle to the South Pole, because that was my idea of an adventurer, was someone who does the most gnarly, hardcore trips, like I had done in part. Like, part of my trip was like that. And so I almost didn't let myself go unless it was the most intense thing ever. And by having these high expectations, I stopped myself, which I think is kind of sad. And I think a lot of us do that.
It's not big enough, so I can't do it. Or I did something that was so much more adventurous 10 years ago, so this isn't even worth starting. It's almost like it's not defeatist, but again, putting something on such a high platform. There's a saying a lot of people probably know, comparison is a thief of joy. And it's interesting, Jude, because I get a lot of listeners to the show email me, which I love, and a few of them have sort of talked about, I love bike adventures and I've taken some, but nothing like your guests. And it doesn't need to be. Like, whatever's giving you joy, and don't compare what you did, which was really hard for you, to someone else. You're your own person there. But can I ask then, West Africa, was there an element that West Africa is a bit less discovered in a way, less touristy, or as opposed to East Africa? Like, was that the pull of West Africa specifically?
Yeah, I'm just turning and looking at it on the globe now, refamiliarize myself. Yeah, it felt more unknown. It felt less traveled. It felt like there's more to be discovered there. West Africa's had a pretty horrid time. Lots of coups and instability since the colonialists left. And even since then, even when countries have been stable, Ebola in 2014, I think it was. And so very few people have, relatively speaking, visit West Africa. And for me, it's not about, I want to be the first or one of the few. It's about what that means for the experience there. And as I said, that means people, at least in my mind, and this was largely true when the pointing wasn't happening, was, people are really curious to, everyone would say to me, like, what's your mission? Why are you here? What's your mission? And yeah, I chose it because I didn't know too much about it. I didn't have any jaded views on it. I didn't know what to expect. I couldn't put it in a box. I think that was a large part of it. And then I also had this idea that, which would turn out to be very true, that it's got some really, really wild rainforest and some pretty cool landscapes in terms of the savannah, big, big rivers like the Gambia. And yeah, I wanted to get some awe.
And so you had that 3-month timeline to fill yourself with awe and wonder in those landscapes. I guess there's a difference here. I'm just trying to think about it myself, because It's such a different trip in that it's a different time frame, but it's also different because of the terrain. I understand, and I've watched 2 of your videos so far on YouTube on your West African trip, and the terrain there compared to the photos in your blog post from England to India, it's so chalk and cheese, really. The weather we've already talked about is different. What I was going to ask was, having the experience gained from that England to India trip, did you find that helped you a lot in your preparation for West Africa? Or did you find that there were enough differences in terms of where you were going that there was going to be some relatively new stuff you had to figure out on the way as well?
Yeah, it definitely helped me in the sense of giving that confidence of I know the basics of cycle touring pretty well. Like I know, for example, I'm not worried generally about wild camping, with the exception of wildlife, which was a new thing to me. And I know that I can roughly cycle this distance in a day, and that people are generally friendly, and I don't need to be scared, and all these things. There was a lot of novelty for sure. I mean, getting water is very different in Africa. Like in all of Europe and Asia, I'd just find a stream or a river and I'd fill up. And that almost never happened. Not almost, it very rarely happened, especially in the savannah. And equally, you can't just go into a shop or a restaurant because most villages and towns don't have them in West Africa. And you can't ask for water. And even if there is a town, it very often isn't a tap. And when there is a tap, it often isn't working. And then you've got to get used to, right, okay, I'll use the wells because that's what local people use. And that's a whole experience in itself. And it's great fun. Like I was often on my own. These wells are often sort of on the edge of the town so that where people are going to the toilet doesn't mix with the well water, and sort of trying to work out how it sounds really simple, right? You'd think you just pull up a rope and there's a bucket, but buckets are really heavy. And then at the same time, you've got to pour this well water into your bottle and so on. And so that was all new. And I think the other thing that was quite new was the traffic, or how people drive in the towns and the cities. It's almost as if they literally don't see you, so, which is quite novel and something to get used to. So if a car wants to, they drive on the right and they're driving along and you're on the right ahead of them, and they want to turn 50 meters ahead of you, even if they see you, they will literally just pull in front of you to the point you have to slam your brakes on. And that's considered normal. There's just a hierarchy of pedestrian, bicycle, car, truck, and so on. And I came off within the first 10 minutes of cycling out of Dakar on day one, because this car just pulled right in front of me. I was on the sand, I slammed my brakes on, and I came off. And no apology, nothing. And I'm not criticizing them. It's just the way they do it there is that you need to get out their way and not the other way around. So that was kind of new.
There's a context where I think it was Danish traveller Martin. There's an episode with Martin and Katja. They rode the Americas from the south to the north. And Martin done some significant world travel as well. Similar to you, actually, in a way. I think his first big trip, 40,000 kilometres, I think it was, and it included being in Central Asia in wintertime, I think. But what he said was that on the trip that he subsequently took, he had, figuratively speaking, panniers worth of experience to pack on as well. And I was wondering, can you relate to that?
Yeah, a fair bit. You're always learning, but at the same time, I think especially when it comes to human interactions, I definitely called on experience quite a lot. Like, as we alluded to with things in Tibet, like I don't mind pushing the limit a bit of where I'm allowed to cycle. So part of, I think the first episode, I was cycling on a motorway in Senegal because it was largely empty and I just got bored of getting stuck in sand and kind of got in trouble with the police at the end. And just, a lot of people would understandably be really quite scared of, I was effectively detained for an hour and I was told it was going to be 24 hours. But just calling on that experience of, I've spoken to so many police and army of places where I wasn't meant to be cycling, but also not causing anyone any harm, and just having the confidence to talk through that situation. And simple things like, you've got to be personable with people. And that situation sort of actually took a turn for the better when we started talking about football, which is a universal language, especially in Africa. It wasn't even intentional from my part, to be fair. He was trying to understand my name and I kept saying Jude, and then he didn't get it. And then eventually he said, like Jude Bellingham, who's a big football star at the moment. And after that, we were off. And I just kept talking about that, getting him to talk about his interest in football. And then before too long, it was, okay, off you go. don't do it again.
I have to ask, did you find out what club he supported?
I think he said Arsenal, but I can't remember. We talked a lot about the North London derby. I think it was Arsenal.
It reminds me of a scene in your video as well, surrounded by children, school children. I think you took football cards with you, didn't you, to hand out?
Yeah, I think this was my girlfriend Nicola's idea actually. Before I left, I wanted to, again, a big part of this trip was about connecting with people. It really matters to me, connection. For all this wild and remote cycling, as I said, the other side of it is connection. And I think I'd said to her, like, can you think of any novel ways I can connect with locals? Or maybe it started with the classic thing of what should I take to give away? And I didn't want to certainly didn't want to give away money, or I just had to think about it. A lot of people take pencils and textbooks and so on. And I think it was her idea, something to do with football. And so I bought 60 football cards for about £10. And yeah, it was a great thing to do in terms of you'd stop and people would be so interested in these footballers because they'd seen a lot of them on the telly. But I quickly learned that if there's 20 kids around you, you can't just give one of them one football card. If you give one of them one football card, you need to give all of them. So I gave away a lot quite quickly, and then I just sort of stopped for quite a long time because I was just like, I don't know how to do this. And then I actually ended up giving quite a lot to grown men because we would just have nice chats, and I'd ask them what club they support, and in hope that they'd say a club, which I'd have a player's football card. So it was a really nice way to bond with people. But the thing that people always asked for was either pencils or footballs. And obviously it's kind of hard to carry lots of footballs. But yeah, footballs was probably the main one they asked for.
Pencils as well. That's quite cool to think about too. You always get this stereotype that people are asking for money. To hear that it's something different, the idea of pencils to write with or something like that. And I'm thinking children here, pencils would be what they're asking for.
Yeah, it's mostly children, and to be really real. They 4 times out of 5 they'd ask for a pencil or a football, and when I say I don't have any, they would then say money.
Okay, yeah, all right.
So yeah,
you arrived in Senegal, didn't you, for this trip? Is that where the journey began?
Yeah.
You arrive in Senegal. What's the rough plan? How do you devise a trip for 3 months in West Africa? I can tell from the way that you travel, you're not someone that goes, this day I'm going to go this far, this day I'm going to go this far, this day I'm going to go this far. But did you have like a sort of scope in your mind of how this was going to work out and where you were going to go around to, like from a route overview point of view?
Not massively. It was actually kind of similar to the England to India trip in that I had one part of the trip which I really wanted to do, and it was sort of climactic towards the end. Similar to wanting to go to the Pamirs, which inspired the first trip, I wanted to go deep into the Liberian jungle. If you look at Liberia on a satellite map on Google Earth or whatever, all of West Africa is pretty green. But there's these 2 big patches in Liberia where it's just a deep, deep, rich green. And they've got 2 very large rainforests there. And I would just lie there again at night thinking, what's it like to be truly alone deep in the Liberian rainforest? And that's just a question I had to answer. So I was sort of aiming for Liberia for that reason. And I had a rough idea of, okay, there's some mountains in Guinea, and I actually wanted to go to the little islands in Guinea-Bissau, but realized I didn't quite have enough time by the time I was there, so I missed that. But it was really, I wasn't focused on get to Liberia, but the route was based on finish in Liberia.
Something else that I really noticed from watching your YouTube videos, Jude, was you really were taking the road less travelled, the path less travelled, the track less travelled sometimes, the does this actually exist track less travelled. Would that be fair to say as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it's no one really calls himself an explorer anymore, and that's with fair reason because you can see every inch of the earth on Google Earth, and there's basically anywhere in the world apart from the base of the sea floor which people haven't been. But that doesn't mean those people who would have been explorers don't have that same desire, that urge, whatever that drive is. And so, whilst I'm not kidding myself that I'm discovering somewhere for the first time, I like to go places where I don't know if it's possible to go, especially with a bicycle that weighs 50 kilos, 53 kilos with water. It's that same feeling of like, is this possible? Like, I've done my research. I think there's a path there. I don't know how steep it is. I don't know what the surface will be like, how grippy it is. But I'm going to give it a go because it looks like, whether it's a high plateau in Tibet or in Guinea, for example, it was this incredible large waterfall, double waterfall, which I had to myself. And I even had to ditch the bike at one point because it was so steep and go down on foot. And I spent a few hours just in awe. So yeah, the path less traveled it's that same thing that drove explorers, I think, of wanting to find something for yourself. I don't care if someone's been there before. I'm not claiming to be, when I say I've discovered this place, it means I've discovered it for myself, and that's what it's really about. And you could do that in England. You could do it in Australia. Think of those people who email in, your listeners, saying I'm doing a 2 or 3 day trip. It's amazing if you discover something, in your backyard. I think that's really valuable. And that's, for me, is what cycle touring is all about. It's not about kilometers done. It's not about altitude gained. It's about that feeling of exploration and like you're out there in, the wild and you're thriving.
Something we spoke about before we press record on this was this trip, your latest one, you were doing the smallest distances per day, but you sort of felt like you were coming up with the most vivid experiences as well. It was totally not about fast or how far you were going each day in terms of that at all, was it?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually posted about this on my Instagram just this week about how those days where the odometer said 9 kilometers or 20 kilometers, those were the real exploration days, and those were the best days. And I think that realization came from the fact that my memory of cycling to India is I'd averaged around 100 kilometers a day if it was flattish and I wasn't pushing hard. And for some reason in Africa, I really struggled to do more than 60. I think I wasn't cycling as many hours. That's definitely true because of the heat and how hard it was to find water and so on. So I was only doing about 3 or 4 hours actual riding per day. And I definitely had a bit of a thing in my head of like, gosh, I'm really not going as far. And I was aware my bike was heavier maybe, but it was a great realization it was actually when I found that waterfall in Guinea, as in found it for myself. And I did 12 or 15 kilometers that day. And I just thought, oh yeah, the shortest days have all been the best ones because it means I've been on absolutely awful roads, pushing my bike, lifting it over trees, or going somewhere really exciting. And the most boring days by far were the perfect asphalt, straight, flat. And those were the days where I'd be complaining for sure, because I'm not that sort of cyclist.
I think I remember seeing you complain on one of those days in your YouTube clip of like this just flat, boring road. I can't remember if it was just dead straight. It was definitely flat. It was, very early on in the trip.
And hot.
To be fair to you, Jude, that would do my head in. I cannot deal with flat. That's the reason why I live in the mountains. But that waterfall, my gosh, what an amazing experience. I watched it the whole time thinking about what an amazing experience. And it was an adventure to get to be able to a spot to enjoy it, to view it, but you really had it on yourself. And if I recall, it was almost like you were at the halfway mark of the waterfall because it was sort of behind you. And then if you looked more, I don't know if there were other waterfalls or it sort of continues cascading further down the landscape.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mega.
Yeah, it was basically a double waterfall. There was one sort of, I don't know what it was, maybe 80-meter waterfall, then flat, very calm, deceiving river for maybe 300 meters goes along, and then another sort of 60, 70-meter huge waterfall. And I went to all three. I camped above the first one, and then I visited between the two. And I didn't go below the bottom one, but I went to a viewpoint around the corner to see them both. That was really special, that waterfall, because there's something about being there, and I talk about this in the YouTube video, but there's something about being in this place where I didn't know if it was possible to get there. And even though, I'm not discovering it for the first time, the fact that I didn't know if it was possible to get there or not, and that I was there, and that I was fully alone, and that there was no one who said, not even on the internet, this is possible, by the way. Because I researched that waterfall, and the final footpath, it's known you can do. But the way I got there across a ford, everyone on the app which people use for traveling in West Africa, they said it's not possible because they're all in 4x4s. And I just went and did it with a bike. And it just gave me this real feeling of, I was quite scared, but I was scared, but that doesn't mean I thought it was dangerous. But I still had this feeling of, I'm really out here on my own. and the immensity of this waterfall crashing down. There was a constant rainbow at the bottom of it, and the spray was soaking my face and my clothes. And it was just such immense energy. And to have got there on my own with a lot of climbing, it made it a very, very special moment for sure.
Hi listeners, are you looking for where your next bike adventure is going to take you? Well, I really hope that you're considering joining me on my first ever Seek Travel Ride lightweight bikepacking tour. Leaving on the 28th of June, we start and finish in the awesome French city of Toulouse. We have 5 days of riding, 6 nights of hotel stays, and all your meals are fully catered for. I am one of your ride leaders, and I'll be giving you some insights into everything that we're going to be seeing along the way on some of the most dreamiest roads in the foothills of the French Pyrenees. To find out more, head to seektravelride.com or check out the link in the show notes through your podcast player app. And if this is something you'd be interested, or maybe you've got a friend who you think could be interested in it, feel free to share that to them as well. I'd love you to be part of my riding crew and join me for what I'm fairly certain is going to be an awesome, fun experience. Okay, now back to the episode. I'm trying to think if it was there as well. You've talked about it, but you've also got like these little tiny, nothing sort of planks of bridges to cross over, and there's a section of the river that's running quite fast, and I think there was some people there that helped you get your bike across. And
Yeah.
I also remember, when you said how you camped there, I don't know if you ever came across it. I don't see it in my algorithm anymore, but there was an Instagram account called You Didn't Camp There, and it's an account which calls out influencers who set up a pretty camp somewhere, but it's quite clear that it's fake and they never camp a night there. But you could have a counterpoint one saying, I did camp here. It's similar to your Tumblr and your From My Pillow view. It's like,
view from my pillow.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a wild camping spot that's going to be hard to beat, even just in terms of how you got there in the first place as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a superficial question.
Yeah, go on.
Would you rather set up camp there at that waterfall again, or somewhere with like a big mountain view? So superficial, Bella. Oh, such a stupid superficial question. Sorry.
No, I'd go for a mountain view, I think. I mean, that river was incredible. It was so loud because there were mini waterfalls right where I was. And it gave me an experience I've never had anywhere else of just being next to this raw energy and feeling, that, I'll use the word again, that energy of nature, which is sort of within all of us. And it's within mountains and it's within big, powerful rivers as well. But to see it in such abundance, again, I was in no danger at all, but I constantly felt slightly scared because I'd never witnessed something so powerful. But it was hard to sleep. It was very loud, and I kept worrying about the river level rising. And so I'd put sticks out next to the rocks that I'd check every few hours to see if they'd got wet or not. But a nice tranquil mountain view, that also sounds quite nice. So I'll take the new mountain view.
You know what? I know this is going to sound I don't want this to sound crass, and I apologise if it does, but where I live very close to a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is the Cirque du Gavin. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is because you have amazing mountain views there. And the largest vertical drop waterfall in I think all of France. I don't think it's all of Europe, but anyway, it's a 400-meter drop waterfall there as well. And it's pretty accessible. You don't need to bush bash your way through a rugged, powerful river, so you don't have that element of it. But you are able to camp up quite high and feel a bit alone. So there you go. There's a spot in the world that maybe combines both for you. Such a tangent.
Yeah, great.
I want to get into, and it's interesting, when I know that I'm interviewing guests, I write down a list of question themes, and the ones for you, Jude, I think I joked, and it might have even said it in the ones that I sent across, saying this could be its own episode. I certainly did that about Tibet. 3 days in a Liberian jungle, through that rainforest there, that definitely could be its own episode. But I want you to take me through that 3-day experience, because I feel that was one that you clearly had thought about beforehand. Like you wanted to know what's it like to be there, but actually what happened to you when you were there and how you got through it and what it turned out to be. Oh, just take me there. Just take us all there.
I'll do my best. Yeah, so it was actually it was 7 days in the rainforest, but there were like different levels of intensity, and there were arguably 3 days that were the most intense. It started crossing from Sierra Leone. Even that was uncertain. I was researching so hard to see if there was a border crossing, official border crossing, anywhere near where I wanted to go. And I found that there was one quite far north, but despite using all the apps, all the Facebook groups we've talked about, no one had even mentioned this border crossing, which I'd found on a UN Food Programme report. The UN Food Programme have a great website about logistics in Africa, and it said there's a border crossing, and I just thought, I'm going to do it. I could see it on Google Earth. I could see a little hut on either side. I'm going to do it. That's where the adventure started. It was super wild and remote there, and crossing there in really steep gravel dirt tracks, and it's all red dirt with this amazing green lush forest and blue skies. And basically the idea, as soon as I entered Liberia, so I'm right on the western part of Liberia, I could see on a map that there's a big rainforest to the south of me, and that there's a track that goes so far from the north into the rainforest but doesn't go the whole way through. And then I could see that from the bottom, there's a track that comes quite far up, but again, not the whole way through. And there's a sort of a 12-kilometer gap. And I just thought, well, I want to go south. I want to go through the rainforest. And the alternative is taking effectively a highway, several hundred kilometers the whole way around the rainforest. And I just thought, that's boring. I don't want to do that. So I thought, I want to try and cross that gap and then go through the rainforest. So it's so interesting that region of Liberia. It's so remote that they use Sierra Leone currency. They use Leones because they're much closer to Sierra Leone's population than the rest of Liberia. They even use their cell phone towers. So I carried on using my SIM card before I got deep in the jungle, my Sierra Leone SIM card. So day one was cycling south along this jeep track. And then I got to the end of the road pretty quickly. And I really didn't know at all what that was going to look like. It's so hard, especially if you've never been to the jungle, to look at Google Earth and think, can I walk through there? Is it swamp? Is it full of leopards? Is it whatever? But I got there and chatted with the locals for a while. I had some lunch, and I just asked. I said, I think there should be a path. Is there a path through to the next village? And they said, yeah, but it's very, 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 you can't do it with a bike. Anyway, in the end, they said, look, we'll give you, basically, they nominated 2 young men to come with me. It ended up being 3 at the start. And it meant that we could take all the panniers off the bike. And for this was the 12-kilometer stretch where there's no track on the map. And yeah, we carried all the stuff between 4 of us. After about 1 hour, one of the guys went back, and I opened my handlebar bag to give him a small bit of cash. He was very grateful, and he went back because he had to go. We're really bushwhacking at this point. So I'm carrying 2 or 3 panniers, another guy's carrying a couple of panniers, and then one guy's carrying my bicycle. And my bicycle had my handlebar bag attached, which, as many cyclotourists know, like, you never leave out of sight because that's normally got your valuables in.
Passport, money.
Yeah, everything. And in Sierra Leone, you need wads of cash. I think, let's say $100 is probably 5 centimeters thick in Sierra Leone currency, off the top of my head. So you've got bundles of cash, even if you've only got $100 or $200 with you. And well, yeah, it was really, I mean, there was no track. This guy had a machete and he was just clearing the way, but he kept going a bit too far ahead and out of sight. And I'd actually just done some filming for my videos where I'd said to the camera sort of, I've got no reason not to trust him, but I really don't like that my handlebar bag keeps going out of sight. And then, I caught up with him 5 minutes later, and my handlebar bag has 4 latches to shut it, and 3 of them were open. And I thought, oh, that's not very good. So I opened it up. My stuff was there, but I opened the zip compartment where the money is, and a wad of cash was missing. And I guess I sort of had to think on my feet, because I can't go on the attack and start accusing these people of stealing from me, because I don't know where I am. I'm in the middle of the jungle. They're the ones who know the way forward and the way back. And there's 2 of them. And he's got a machete, which, just to be clear, the machete was for bushwhacking. It's not meant to be a weapon, but it is also a weapon. And so I played it cool initially. And I was like, oh, I've lost my money. Have you seen any of my money? He was totally blank. I almost believed him. He was so blank. And then his mate caught up, and we stopped for a few minutes so they could have a cigarette break. And then I looked down at this guy who'd been carrying my bike. I looked down at his pocket, and the wad of cash was just sticking out. And I just reached over and I said, you found it. Thank you so much. And I reached over and I plucked out his pocket and I said, no worries. Like, I'm obviously going to pay you, but I'll pay you when we get to the end. I guess the idea was to de-escalate because I needed him to think that I didn't think that he'd robbed me. Otherwise, he could. Yeah, I needed him to be able to keep pretending that he wasn't someone who just robbed me. Otherwise, he could be defensive, or he would, think I was going to accuse him. So I just played really dumb, and I was very grateful. And I said, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. You've got my money. I'll pay you at the end. No problem." And then from then on in, I carried my handlebar bag. And we did another, they said it was going to be an hour and a half, and I knew it wasn't. We did about 3.5 hours in total to get through to the next village. But again, like their sort of mood started deteriorating a bit, and I felt like I had to try and manage that. So I said I had some music, and I said, "Do you want to listen to some music?" And they said, "Yeah, do you have any African music?" And I didn't, but I did. I downloaded a load of albums just the night before, and the only black musician I downloaded was Damian Marley, who I'm not a huge fan of, but I just thought I'm going to put that on and hope that it resonates with them because I had a speaker, and they loved it. And I kept that album on repeat until we got to the end because I felt like it was the only thing keeping their sort of, I don't know, keeping them flowing, keeping their mood from turning. Because whenever it stopped, they would say to me, "How much further, like, do you think it is?" I don't know why they're asking me. Are you going to pay us good money? And I felt very vulnerable at that point, if I'm honest.
Yeah. What a situation. My gosh.
Yeah, anyway, so I'll speed up a bit. But we got to the village. I paid them both. I paid them 3 times more than a normal day's wage, but it was still only, I think, $5 each, probably. And they were so over the moon. And I said to that guy at that point, I said, "Don't steal my money. That's not cool." But I didn't bother lecturing him, moved forward. And then, yeah, I was in this village with there's only one guy there, the village elder. And what I learnt was that the road that continued south through Liberia is not used anymore. And so this is the road which I'd seen on the track, which I thought I'd now sort of completed the gap. And there's no road because they actually trade, that's so remote in terms of Liberia that they actually trade across the border with Sierra Leone. But I don't have the option to keep crossing the border at unofficial points because it's illegal. Or so I thought. So I went on this old track, which this was the sort of 3 days of, there used to be a road there. It was built in the 80s, I think. But when the war happened, the civil war happened in the 90s, it fell into total disrepair. You only need one massive tree to fall across the road, which the villagers can't clear. The road falls out of use and it's totally, totally overgrown. So yeah, it was about 25 kilometers of really overgrown walking. Like I often couldn't see the path 2 or 3 meters ahead of me. And as I said, every 50 or 200 meters, there'd be a fallen massive tree. I'd either try and drag my bike under, lift it over. I'd often have to take all the bags off and put it on. And, to give you an idea, like I couldn't really cycle. It was such thick vegetation, such poor surface, but I was just having the best time. There was a huge amount of uncertainty, a huge amount of, is this going to work? And also I couldn't really turn back at that point because if I went back, I'd be at the village where those guys had got me to. They weren't there to transport me back through the rainforest. So I had to go forward. Yeah, I had a stint where I didn't see another person for 24 hours. Eventually I came to a clearing where there were 3 or 4 houses and they'd cleared maybe 5 football fields worth of jungle. And I was like, hello, hello, there's no one there. And eventually I saw some kids, and then the kids saw me and they absolutely scarpered. There's quite a common reaction for people who haven't seen a white person before, to be very scared. I had a grown man who took about 5 minutes to not run away as I went towards him. And eventually I sat down and put my arm out and said, it's okay. Like, do you want to see that I'm not a spirit or something? And he ended up touching my skin as if it was the most novel thing ever. And so from then on, after sort of 3 days of really overgrown track and fallen trees, I reached what was called the Jungle Road, which is technically passable via motorbike. So all the trees get chopped away and the bridges are intact. So what I didn't say was on those first 3 days, you'd often get to a stream through the jungle and all of the bridges, without exception, had just collapsed, molded, whatever, disrepair. And it's hard to describe, but I did put photos on my Instagram, and I am working on this episode now for the YouTube episode. But these are quite deep gorges, and a 50-kilo bike. It was some real sweating that happened, and every half hour I'd take off my shirt and I'd wring it out and I'd put it back on and I'd just rinse and repeat. It was a very special time, and every time I'd be camping at night, the chorus of sounds from the jungle, I'd put my hammock up because I wanted to try being in a hammock for once in the jungle. It just felt like the thing you do in the jungle to me. And yeah, it's just so loud with monkeys and insects and birds, and a really, really special place. I recorded a lot of that, just the sound, just so that I didn't forget it.
I was going to say, did you record the sound? I don't know if it was the podcaster in me that wanted this audio of that, because you'd be hearing things that you've never heard before.
Yeah.
Just a cacophony of different sounds in this totally foreign environment. Can I ask, Jude? Before we were talking about West Africa and perceptions and experiences you wanted,
Yeah.
and you talked about laying awake at night thinking about what's it like there, the Liberian jungle and stuff.
Yeah.
Did reality meet up with your perception? Like, it just sounds next level.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember very clearly having a moment of a really, really sort of life affirming, fulfilling moment of, in the context of that question of what's it like to be there in the jungle, and remembering that that's the question I've been asking for a long time, thinking, I'm here, this is really cool, I've made this happen. That sort of, what's the word, sort of, making your goal or your dream a reality. And in terms of my expectations, yeah, I didn't realize how loud it would be at night. It just gets so loud, it's incredible. There aren't too many sudden noises, so you can sort of fall asleep to it, similar to white noise. Expectations, yeah, it was slightly different. There were far fewer mosquitoes than I was expecting, which I was really happy about. What I wasn't expecting was the ants, because I only had sandals. I was in sandals the whole trip, which I was aware going into the jungle is not ideal, but I also wasn't prepared to change my entire, buy different clothes just for a few days. I thought it'd be possible, and it was, but yeah, there are ants where they get into your sandal and they bite you, and you think you can just flick them off. And there was one ant I remember so clearly. I flicked it 10 times, like hard, from point blank range, and it just wouldn't let go. And eventually you pull it, and its teeth are sunk, or whatever they have, the pincers are sunk into you. You pull it, and its whole body comes off, and its head and its pincers are stuck in you still. And that was not a fun night, that bit. But again, it's one of those things that as soon as you get past that, as soon as you're in that moment, you're in pure flow, you're in pain, but you don't have negative feelings because you're not reflecting on it being bad. You're just in it. And that's very different to thinking, gosh, this is so awful, I really want this to stop. You're pure flow, deal with it, this is hard, deal with it. And then as soon as that ends, you feel this great feeling of, I've made myself okay. And that's so empowering. And that, for me, to use your word, is the transformational effect of cycle touring, is making yourself okay.
Totally. And I always say you don't know it sometimes when you set out, but when you set out on a cycle tour, you've signed up for like a crash course in problem solving.
Yeah.
And, making yourself okay in a myriad of problems. You could probably relate to that in many ways. I mean, that whole experience, you had to be in the moment, because if you weren't, you wouldn't be okay. Like, you just had to get through, didn't you?
Yeah.
Far out.
The last bit I'd add on that is, the days were full of uncertainty and will I be able to get across this fallen bridge, and a lot of pain and discomfort and exertion. And then, yeah, at night, some insects would come out and lots of scratches and cuts and ants and so on. But that feeling when I got into my tent, it was so satisfying. Like, that was my home. And the feeling within my tent is nearly always the same, whether I'm on top of a mountain or I'm in the Liberian jungle, is when I'm in my tent, nothing can get in my tent apart from very large animals, which I wasn't expecting, so that wasn't on my mind. Nothing get in my tent. I'm on my airbed, in my sleeping bag. I've got my jumper for my pillow, and I'm safe. And this is my little cocoon. And so that feeling of being out in the uncertain all day and then eating dinner, getting in the tent, is a really satisfying thing. And it can almost become this, like, it could be turned into a ritual because it's so important. It's the relief. Can't be in sort of survival mode constantly. And when I get into my tent, I understand a lot of people would look at being in a tent in the jungle as still survival mode, but for me, I can switch off now. Like, it doesn't matter if I put my phone down in the wrong place, or everything I need is here and nothing's going to interfere with that, and I don't really need to do too much. And I really need that respite at the end of the day. It really matters to me.
Yeah, and I guess it's going back to that routine of similarity, as this is the routine and this is my cocoon, your haven of safe space. That was your tent. That was your ritual.
Yeah.
And maybe you didn't know that before this experience either, that have just the importance of it.
Yeah. Well, one thing I didn't realize on that, because cycling through Europe and Asia, it was so easy to wild camp in quite remote places. And with the exception of the rainforest, which was very remote, West Africa is not very remote. And I would so often set up camp and then I'd have an entire village come in and watch. I'm not exaggerating. I've got photos and I will put the video up in my next episode of an entire village watching me eat dinner. So I camped on this sort of flat, hard mud area to the side of a village. To be fair, I did actually go and check and I couldn't see anyone around. And then it only takes one person and they tell everyone. And, people try and chat a little bit, but at heart, I'm an introvert most of the time. I can be extroverted when I'm on a passionate topic, but at heart, I'm an introvert in the sense that I need alone time to recharge. And I found that really challenging at the end of a hard and grueling day, not having my precious time is sitting down. I took a camping chair this time, one of those little micro ones, sitting down with my pasta, with my noodles, and just staring into the sky for 20 minutes. That is like absolute bliss. And when I don't have that because there's a load of people still around me, even if they're being lovely and even if they're being relatively quiet, I can't quite switch off. And I found that quite hard because that was quite a common occurrence. And sometimes I'd wake up in the morning and there'd be people there as well. And I remember getting into my bed that night, the night that the villagers all watched me, and they all went and it got dark. And then this one boy stayed and I was just lying there in my tent trying to relax. And he said, "Give me money." And I said, unfortunately, I always said no. I said no. And he said, "Give me money." I said no. And he said, "Okay, I'll come back in the morning." And then I woke up in the morning and he was literally there staring at me because I didn't put a fly sheet on my tent because it was hot. He was just watching me sleep. And I didn't eat breakfast that day because I didn't want to be surrounded by people. I cycled off and then I didn't find a good place to stop. That is definitely one of the things I did not expect about West Africa is they say in Africa, and it's true, you're never alone apart from in the rainforest.
I think Steph Devery mentioned that, her experience in Africa as well. She woke up once too. I think she said, and I don't know what the actual number was, but it was like 200 school children all looking at her because she'd camped at the school oval, thinking this was all fine and that she'd be away before anyone was there. But then she heard all this whispering outside her tent and then she unzipped and, just the whole school was there. So I could just imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
Jude, you took the decision to film this tour. Is that a case of, again, something that's different that's happened in that time of, 10, 11 years? Technology's come to a degree where you are able to do something like this? Or really, actually, the question I want to ask is, you took the decision to film on this tour. What was the motivation behind that? Listeners, if you're into adventure cycling, bikepacking, or just love hearing the kinds of stories that we're featuring on the podcast, then you need to come to Beyond the Bike. It's a live event I'm co-hosting in London on the 14th and 15th of May at Peckham Levels. Each night, we've got an amazing lineup of riders, ultracyclists, round-the-world adventurers, filmmakers and storytellers, plus exclusive film screenings, audience Q&As, and even a gear giveaway from Old Man Mountain. It's 2 nights of everything you love about bike adventures, off the screen and in real life. Tickets are on sale now via Eventbrite. Just search for Beyond the Bike or head into your podcast player app and hit the link in the show notes. Get your tickets, join me, come and say hello. Now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, it's a good question. It comes down to a bit of the same story about after my cycle to India. I wanted to keep adventuring. I wanted to make a life being outdoors. And I sort of dabbled in it and then it faded away. And those sort of 10 years that passed where I talked about lying awake at night thinking, why aren't I cycling? Why aren't I in the mountains? There's an extra thought, which is not really admitting to myself, I want to be an adventurer. Like if I could click my fingers tomorrow, I would spend at least half of my life adventuring and maybe the other half helping people adventure. And as anyone knows, it can be quite a scary and hard thing to admit what you're truly, truly passionate about because you're setting it out there and it means that if you fail, you and other people know that you failed at the thing that's most important to you. I'm not saying that's a good mentality, but that's the mentality I had. And so I was sort of in denial that I really wanted to be an adventurer. And So the idea to film was, in a very sort of humble way, being like, well, this can be the first step. I'm not expecting that I'm going to make this YouTube video and tomorrow earn six figures because Netflix buy it from me. That's not going to happen. But I did want to use it as a springboard to restart my adventure career. So I wanted to use it. It's great to have cycled to India 10 years ago, and that's arguably a better story, the England to India story, but it's quite far in the past. I want to be able to say, look, here's this thing. People can see how I communicate it, and hopefully they take something from it. And so in the future, whether it's applying for outdoor-based work or a grant, or maybe approaching a production company to do another expedition, I can say, look, it's basically my adventure CV. And I wanted to try it. I really like being creative digitally. Everything I do that's creative is digital, whether it's DJing or making maps on my computer. Using digital tools is how I'm creative. And so I wanted to turn my hand to it, and I really enjoyed it. And it means I've been able to share in a much richer way than I ever could before what that journey was really like. And yeah, I'm hoping it's the start of something.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the episode where I see what you just talked about in the jungle. I've loved the first two episodes that I've seen. Listeners, Jude's YouTube channel, Jude Kriwald, it is his name, and I'll put links in the show notes so that you can get a better understanding of what we've been talking about and listening to Jude talk about as well. I guess another part of that, when you were saying if you could give your life, you'd spend half your time adventuring, half your time helping other people. You've taken first steps towards that just very recently. You've launched what you've called Adventure Mentor. I'd love you to talk a little bit about that for me.
Sure. Thank you thanks for the opportunity. So this was an idea that actually came up just before I went to West Africa. I have a really inspiring adventurer friend called Michelle, and we were talking, and she just casually said the words. She was like, blah, blah, so-and-so is my adventure mentor. And I thought, that's a good name. And the concept of having an adventure mentor is something I'd never thought of before. I went home and I bought the domain adventurementor.org. Before I really knew what it was going to be, I just thought, I'm going to do something here. And so the idea is pretty simple, that I want to help other people go on adventures. And in particular, I want to help other people from more diverse backgrounds go on adventures, with plenty of exceptions. Too many people, especially the particularly famous adventurers, from my demographic, white, maybe middle class male. And so I'm offering one-to-one mentoring for free to anyone who is typically underrepresented in the world of adventure. So the idea is that whether you've got a pretty clear idea, like you want to cycle around the world or row across the Atlantic, or whether you're not sure and you're sort of at that stage of, I know an adventure would be good for me, but I don't know what I want to do, we can have a one-to-one session free of charge. And in that, we could focus on whatever area you want. So that might be logistics, might be visas, it might be confidence building. It might be talking about what sort of adventure you want to build. And yeah, we launched just this week, done our first session already. People are starting to book it. So yeah, it's something I'm really excited about because adventuring is a real passion of mine, but it just never felt quite right doing it just for my sake. But on the other hand, I've had absolutely life-changing growth as a result of it, and I want to enable more people to feel the same.
I think it's absolutely fantastic, Jude. When I saw it flash up, I thought, this is awesome. And if it's something that I've learnt just in reflecting on myself, things that go well are things that you're passionate about, that give you energy by doing it. You were talking about being in flow during the whole jungle experience. When you're forced to do something that you don't enjoy, it becomes like work. When you're doing something because you're passionate about it, and it gives you energy. And I feel the Adventure Mentor thing, that's all it could possibly give you as well.
Yeah.
If people want to reach out to you, because I'm sure I'm going to have listeners who will be keen on this, and I definitely encourage you to do this. What did you say the website was? Is it adventurementor.org?
Yeah, so it's adventurementor.org. You can read about it there. You can book in a session on there. What I would also say is, on your point about doing something you love and it growing, I'm really pushing the free calls for people who are underrepresented, because that's where I want to start. I do also offer one-to-one calls for people who are more my demographic, which I charge for, but I'm not really thinking about this as a business at this stage. That would help maybe cover the costs of those free ones. But I really want to put it out there and see who comes in and how we can help, and how maybe this transforms into something which I might not even have plans for yet. So Yeah, it's adventuremental.org, or I post about it all the time on my own Instagram, which is just Jude Kriwald. I haven't created a separate account for it. I think it's all just going to fall under the one roof of adventure things that I'm up to on my Instagram.
Brilliant. And again, listeners, I will provide links to that in the show notes so you can find out more about it there. Jude, I feel we've been given insights into many facets of your trips, but it is a question that I like to keep consistently, and that is, I want you to tell me about one day of your trip. Now, we've already heard about the waterfall, and we've heard about the jungle, and I think we've heard about a day in Afghanistan. I want you to take me to a day, and maybe it is going to be somewhere in there, or maybe it's going to be in Tibet, but I want you to take me and the listeners just to one day of your trip, if you could.
Okay, sure. I think I will take you to Tibet, because that is still, I think, hands down the most exciting and nourishing and fulfilling cycling I ever did. It's 3 a.m. and my alarm goes off, and it's gone off because I meant to sneak round the biggest checkpoint on my entire journey. This really matters because if I can't get through these checkpoints, if I get caught in even just one single checkpoint, then I won't be able to get to Nepal, and that's India, and there's no other way to get to India via land. So a lot's riding on it. I didn't sleep very well because it was really cold, and I was camped right next to a railway with trains going through every couple of hours. I remember snoozing my alarm quite a lot. Really just didn't want to get up. It was just dark and windy and cold. But I packed up my tent, didn't eat anything at that point, and I started making my way towards this checkpoint in this sort of quite wide, dark valley at the start of the Tibetan plateau. And I could see quite a lot of the lights ahead, sort of where trucks had stopped to pass through the checkpoint, and there were security lights and so on. So I decided to dive off the road into sort of almost sand. It was really quite sandy. Pushed my bike for the last 2 kilometers. I didn't realize going into it that there were loads and loads of pits, almost like on a golf course, these deep sand pits. And I got stuck in one of them for about half an hour and had to really drag my bike whilst sort of sat on my bum, pulling it up this slope. And then I got to sort of perpendicular or maybe parallel with the checkpoint. So the road was on my right. And there's this huge wall of sand they've built up, which is about 5 meters tall. And it's probably about a 45-degree gradient. And it was my way around the checkpoint. They'd obviously put it up as a barrier. And again, it took me about an hour to drag my bike up that. Maybe in hindsight, it would have been more sensible to take the panniers off. But I'm always loath to take my panniers off. I've realized that my niche, and this is true even when looking at future expeditions I'm planning, my niche is going places with a touring bike that bikes just aren't meant to go, whether that's the jungle or Tibet or perhaps the North Pole. So went over this, eventually got over this barrier, and then I cycled about 5 kilometers more just to get away from the checkpoint before stopping to sleep, because it was still only sort of 5 o'clock in the morning. It was still dark, and I think it was about -20. Didn't put my tent up, just did what I sometimes did when I'm in a rush, which is wrapping the tarpaulin around my sleeping bag and sort of making a cocoon, a sort of tunnel. Slept like that till 11 a.m. And then I woke up, and I remember checking my thermometer, and at 11 it was still -15. Had some snacks, had some of those sort of squidgy, squeezy Chinese pork sausages things, which don't contain too much pork. And I remember feeling a great sense of satisfaction at that moment, looking out over the plateau, and it's just vast. It's largely flat, but with these peaks that come out, which most of them I'm sure you could walk up, although I never did get off the bike and try, rising up to 5,000 or 6,000 meters. I remember later in the day, there was a moment where there was a checkpoint I hadn't been expecting. It wasn't on my list. I hadn't seen it on the satellite. It was a new one, but it was quite a steep downhill. I was doing about 45 kilometers an hour, and I had my balaclava and my goggles on because there'd been a blizzard sort of coming sideways. So the whole right side of my balaclava was white with snow, and the left was just the normal grey color. And as I approached this checkpoint, I was listening to Eminem, like quite sort of, angry music, quite sort of psych you up music. And I didn't want to stop. And this was where I, really count myself lucky. I was the first person to get to Lhasa in 3 years by bike. And according to Jan, who is sort of the expert in cycling in Tibet, no one's done it since. So this was really particularly lucky that I made it through. I didn't stop. Basically, I was doing 40 kilometers an hour. I came up behind the queue of cars, I swung out into the opposing lane, and I just about squeezed me and my panniers through the barrier and shot through. And then I intentionally sort of didn't look back, partly because it felt badass not to, but also I didn't want to, again, I didn't want them to see that I knew that something wrong had happened. It was only when I was about 50 or 60 meters past I heard someone shout, but no one came after me. I got really quite lucky because that was a little bit reckless, I suppose. And then I guess the ending of this day is that, yeah, I was meant to go around Lhasa because Lhasa has a ton of checkpoints, and I just knew there was no way I'd be able to, just be compromising my trip basically to try and go through Lhasa. So I was going to go around Lhasa, which would be a shame because it's the capital of Tibet, but I wasn't going to do it. And then I met these Chinese cyclists, Han Chinese cyclists, who again they're allowed to cycle in Tibet without a permit, and they said, "Oh, come on, like we'll get you through, we'll smuggle you in." And in the end, I decided to go for it. And we went through 3 checkpoints. And the way we do it was one of them would go first with their face fully exposed so that the border guards could see that they were Chinese. They would just let them through without stopping. Then I would go through fully covered so they couldn't see my eyes. And then again, a Chinese person cycling behind me with their face uncovered. And it worked pretty well. And like sort of the assumption was that, well, you're probably Chinese as well, like the rest of them. And then that night we got into a town and had to find somewhere to stay. And, I was used to wild camping, but they wanted to stop somewhere and get food and everything. And I remember writing in my diary, I don't know if I'd write the same now, but I felt a bit like Anne Frank because they smuggled me into this room at the top of a house and they went out and got dinner and I wasn't allowed out. They said, "You got to stay here." Like the guest house owner was really scared that we've got a foreigner, they could get in trouble. And they brought me up some pork noodles. And I was actually looking back at the checkpoint, which I'd come through a few minutes earlier. And that was a really satisfying moment. And yeah, I guess that sort of ends one of the most exciting days of the trip with lots and lots of checkpoints and lots of adrenaline and a huge amount of good fortune.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, wow. We've talked about it before, how some of the best things that happen on a trip you can't plan for. That's a whole day you could never have planned for when you were planning for adventure. Like these things don't exist. Even the idea of developing a way to get through security checkpoints and having the balaclava and the goggles, like you don't know that you need that. Like what an amazing trip.
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere on your blog that you had mentioned that maybe you're going to be writing a book. I don't know if that has happened. And if it hasn't, gosh, I really hope there's part of you that's going to. Like I want to read more than what's on the website from a 12-year-old blog.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to. And I've got so many journals and notes. And I remember briefly trying when I came back. And, again, I was only 20 years old and I didn't manage to write it. But it's on my list for this year. So I'm just going to be shameless and say, if anyone's got any contacts, agents or publishers who want to talk, I'd really love support getting this story out there because I think there's some really great stories to share.
I'm being selfish and I want a signed copy.
You'll get one.
This goes down as the longest recording I've ever done. And in fact, listeners, it's probably going to come across 2 episodes. But how could I leave any of this out? And Jude, I really appreciate the time you've taken here. We definitely need to wrap things up now. I have 3 questions which I finish my show with and I ask of all my guests.
Of course.
The first one, I think it's probably the hardest question of the pod.
Okay.
If you have to pick a song to be the soundtrack to your adventure, what would that song be?
Yeah. I actually know this one. It would be Neil Young's Roll Another Number for the Road. And there's a reason. So this was back again in the iPod days, MP3 days, pre-Spotify. And so, who had music mattered. And in Tehran, I met this incredibly nice guy called Farid, and he'd given me so much music. And he was the first, he gave me gigabytes and gigabytes. And a lot of it was 60s music, The Doors, Monkees, Neil Young, Janis Joplin. And I'd never listened to it before. And it became the soundtrack for the rest of my trip. And I've still got my old iTunes library with a playlist that says Farid 60s music. And then just so there's a huge sort of emotional attachment, but the essence of that song is getting back on the road again. And I actually, I haven't studied the lyrics. I don't know them that well, but that's the feeling I get of the road's calling and I need to go again. So, roll another number for the road.
Neil Young's Roll Another Number for the Road. That's your choice. And you now have an addition to the Seek Travel Ride playlist. It's available there on Spotify. Every song on that playlist has been chosen by a guest. I always like to play the game of listening to it and reminding myself which guest took what adventure and pretending to be there. So when I listen to it, I'll just definitely transport myself there, Jude. I think that's awesome. Final 2 questions. Oh, I think I know the answer to this one. You have a choice one day. You can cycle your bike forever up a constant, never-ending climb, or alternatively push into a never-ending headwind. Which one are you going to choose?
Who would choose the headwind? That's got to be the climb. Do people choose the headwind?
Some people choose the headwind. It's between 5 and 10% of people choose the headwind. I think I need to reframe the question just to make the climb feel more nasty.
Or make the headwind feel better.
Yeah, exactly. Or have a lovely, refreshing headwind breeze, cool your skin on your face continuously, something like that.
Yeah, with the climb, it's the hard thing is something tangible that you're going up, you're gaining kilometers, you'll eventually meters altitude, you'll eventually probably go down as well. Whereas a headwind, it's just a bit of a pain in the ass. It might as well not be there, there's nothing gained. Maybe it's cooling you down. Anyway, I'll go through all your episodes and find the 5% who said headwind and see what their justifications were, because I'm intrigued.
It's interesting because I can think of a couple here now. Actually, the one I think of, it's the late Chris Barker, previous guest of the show. Tragically, life's taken a bit early. He was on his bike doing what he loved and killed by a truck here in Australia. But Chris, Caveman, Mr. Indie Pack, he chose the headwind because the most brutal day of riding in his life on the Nullarbor into a ridiculous headwind. And he just remembers the exhilaration after that day of thinking, had I not had a headwind, how far I would have gone, and just feeling really proud of himself at the effort he had put into it. So
that's a great mentality.
A bit like your rainforest there, Jude, in that it was such a difficult moment, but he was in it. And I guess what he's taken out from it, it's that sort of sense of pride of getting through something really, really hard.
Of course. Incredible.
Final question. You have a choice one day. You're going to be cycling just for 4 hours. Are you going to be cycling for 4 hours on your own or 4 hours with other people?
Oh, it's not super clear cut. I really enjoy both, but if I have to pick one for the rest of my life, it'd be on my own, which sounds sad. I'm going to go for on my own. I think there are so many great experiences I'd love to share. If it's just 4 hours, then maybe I'd just rather have a nice trip with someone. I don't think in just 4 hours, it depends where I'm setting off from. But, if I'm setting off from home in 4 hours, I'm probably not going to have too wild an adventure given that I live in London. But I'd love to go for a 4-hour bike ride with someone around here. But if I was in Sierra Leone or Tibet or the Andes, I'd go on my own.
So I'm going to have to say, do I let you sit on the fence? I'm going to let you sit on the fence purely because we've been speaking for so long. It'd be mean not to be kind. If the 4 hours was out of the equation and it was just you had to choose, would you rather cycle on your own or with others? You'd be on your own every day of the week, wouldn't you?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Well, Jude Kriwald, it has been an absolute pleasure. It's been an absolute gift, really, to listen to you share your stories of what can only be described as pure adventure. Transformational ones as well. London to India was a monumental trip with so many experiences to decant through. And then West Africa, I think, definitely lived up to its reputation and some for you as well. And I'd like to think you took from it more than you thought before you set off as well. Thank you so, so much for sharing your stories and experiences here on the show for Seek Travel Ride.
Thank you so much for having me, Bella. It's been a real joy. Really appreciate it.
There we go, listeners. That's the wrap for this episode. And if you've been tuning into this story from Jude and are intrigued to learn a bit more, if you live in or near London, I encourage you to join me and Jude and some other previous podcast guests for our Beyond the Bike live shows. We will be featuring Jude on both nights and also showing his amazing Alone Across Gola film, which he has produced since recording that podcast session. It is absolutely brilliant, will blow your socks off. I've got links to tickets in the podcast show notes. So if you open your podcast player app and you can click the links there. Otherwise, simply search for Beyond the Bike on the Eventbrite website and you will find the events there. We're coming to you from Peck and Levels in London on May 14 and 15. It'll be amazing to see as many Seek Travel Ride fans at this event as possible. Now, if you've been enjoying tuning into these episodes and you'd like to support me and the show, you can buy me some virtual coffees. Simply head to buymeacoffee.com/Seek Travel Ride. Buy me a coffee and let me know what it is that you love about the show. And until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening. And before you go, don't forget, Beyond the Bike is happening soon in London on May 14 and 15. It's going to be an incredible night of stories, film, and adventure cycling insights with some of the most inspiring guests from the podcast. Tickets are available now, but they're not going to last. So head to the link in the show notes, grab yours, come to one night, or if you're a super fan, come to both. Grab your ticket before they're gone, and I hope to see you there. Before you go,